Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to today's program, Supporting Sustainable Development in the Arctic, Estonia's Role in Advancing Arctic Collaboration. I'm Mike Sprague. I'm the director of the Polar Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And it is indeed a pleasure to host this discussion focused on, one, Estonia's role in advancing Arctic collaboration, and of course, two, to explore Estonia's aspirations to become an observer nation to the Arctic Council. We'll hear more about both of these themes and more over the next hour, and we'll benefit from the perspectives of two leading voices in Arctic governance and research. I will ask each of our speakers to present their perspectives first, and then invite the audience to ask questions of the panel. And I will do my very best to add your voice to this important discussion. I'm very pleased that the country of Estonia responded to our interest and our request to discuss these very important themes with us today. To begin our program, I'd like to introduce Eva Marie Limitz, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Estonia, to begin our discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to speak today at this webinar dedicated to Estonia's possible contribution to the sustainable development of the Arctic. We are very grateful to the Wilson Center and its Polar Institute for organizing this event together with the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The question obviously arises, why select Estonia as a partner? Aren't we too remote, too small, too unaffected by the Arctic issues? I will try to explain. First, no one can stand aside when the climate changes. We all know the profound effect of those changes on the vulnerable ecosystems of the Arctic. Estonia, as a responsible member of the European Union, wants to cooperate on platforms tackling the effects of climate change. I believe that over the last 30 years, Estonia has proven its ability to take part in different coalitions of the willing to tackle common problems. Regarding the Arctic, we are close enough to feel the direct consequences of the changes in the region. As a direct neighbor of Arctic countries, Estonia also has historical and geographical links with the Arctic. We want to contribute to the sustainable development there, and we do have potential and expertise in Estonia to add some value to the work already being done in this respect. We will speak of it today. This is why Estonia is applying for the Arctic Council observer status. Ladies and gentlemen, for the United States, the fate of the Arctic is both a national and international concern. As an Arctic Council member, the US has an impressive record of international cooperation to be proud of, having also twice chaired the Arctic Council. Last time the US was chair of the Council, an international legally binding agreement on enhancing Arctic science cooperation was signed. Excellence in research is also our strength. Therefore, Estonia and the US are well placed to provide innovative solutions and solid science cooperation for the benefit of the Arctic. Estonian-US cooperation can also prove useful in shaping the broader context surrounding the Arctic by the power of example directing the world on the path of green transition. As an EU member, Estonia is committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. We support the efforts of the EU and the US in leading the world towards decarbonization. When the international community takes bold steps to cut carbon emissions, the Arctic will benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, the ties between Estonia and the United States are strong as we cooperate on so many different levels and issues. Yet, there is untapped potential in widening our cooperation to the sustainable development of the Arctic and climate issues. It is my hope that this webinar can be a stepping stone in this direction. I wish you a good seminar. Thank you.
Minister, for those foundational remarks, noting the connection between Estonia and Arctic nations, and certainly highlighting the relationship between Estonia and the United States, especially in the world of research and our growing interests in the Arctic. Now I'm going to invite to our discussion a distinguished group of our panelists. I will introduce each of them first, and then we'll come back to their opening remarks. Our first panelist, Ambassador Mart Olmar, Undersecretary for European Affairs, Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who will provide an overview of what Estonia's role can and should be in the Arctic. Our next panelist, Ambassador Kea Duell, Special Envoy for Climate and Energy Policy with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our next panelist, Dr. Tarmo Sommara. He's president of the Estonian Academy of Sciences. Our next panel, Dr. Aimro Ventisel, associate professor in ethnology from the University of Tartu. Mr. David Kennedy, senior fellow at the Polar Institute, who previously served as NOAA's senior policy advisor for the Arctic and currently serves as chairman of the United States Arctic Research Commission. And finally, Ambassador David Bolton, senior fellow at the Polar Institute, former ambassador for oceans and fisheries at the U.S. Department of State, and the former chair of the senior Arctic officials during the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. But first, let us begin with Ambassador Olmar for his comments. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraga, for this introduction. Dear audience online, dear speakers, it's really an honor to be in this wonderful event and with such distinguished speakers from US and from Estonia. And of course, we are speaking about important and global topics like Arctic sustainable development and advancing scientific cooperation. So what can be better? So the Arctic is going through a transformation, affecting the region and the planet in multiple ways. Proper response requires international cooperation. And of course on very wide range of issues. And this is exactly what the preeminent fora in the region, the Arctic Council, has been dealing for the last 25 years. In Estonia's view, we can do our part here. As Foreign Minister Liimets in her opening statement already confirmed, Estonia's strong commitment to tackle the effects of the climate change. We are embracing the green transition and are committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. Minister also stated our interest and willingness to contribute to the sustainable development in the Arctic. Allow me to elaborate further of Estonian possible contribution and value added in this regard. Estonia is seeking to become an observer in the Arctic Council because we care. We care about the developments in the Arctic and we know Arctic. And we are willing and ready to use our knowledge and know-how in and for the sustainable development of the Arctic. Our application was a future-oriented step, carrying joint commitment of the public, private, and most importantly, our academic community. So how can a country like Estonia contribute? What can Estonia bring to the table? First, and as the core of our application, it is of course the unique expertise of our scientists in several fields of polar research. This includes extensive research experience on indigenous people in the Arctic. We have historical ties to the Arctic and long traditions of polar research to build on. Our academic community has impressive experience in participating and contributing in different multilateral organizations and initiatives. Secondly, our expertise will combine smart and innovative digital solutions used in both our public and private sector and the potential of our companies. With such practical tools, we could facilitate providing solutions to practical problems, including e-health, online education of Arctic communities for indigenous people, but also related to environmental protection. Estonia, as a dynamic and adaptable country, has gone through several rapid transformations, so we know what we speak about. Dear audience, dear co-speakers, the Arctic Council is a unique forum where the Arctic states set the main direction of the work of the Arctic Council, but where the observers from non-Arctic countries can bring the relevant expertise to the table and thereby contribute to the work of the Council in a very practical manner. Currently, the Arctic Council will dispose a richer and concurrently, the Arctic Council will dispose much richer and more profound portfolio of expertise when making decisions that, through Arctic, have a global resonance. This is clearly a win-win situation and reflects in a very good manner the international cooperation and collaboration I was referring in the beginning. To conclude, we see that Estonia, a vibrant, responsible, innovative country, has a good knowledge, long-term experience, and smart solutions to offer. And therefore, we are in a position to engage in Arctic affairs with a practical mindset. And I'm looking very much forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those comments. I already have some questions for you, but we will certainly wait until all of our speakers have had a chance to provide their perspectives. Now it's a pleasure to invite Ambassador Kea Duell for her comments. Recall that she is the Special Envoy for Climate and Energy Policy. Ambassador, please.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard some of the main arguments why Estonia thinks we can contribute to the work in the Arctic Council. I hope it was already convincing, but being Estonia, we never rely on words only. And the main idea of today's panel is to introduce the Estonian scientists' relevant work. Before we turn to that, I'd like to stop for a moment on a bigger picture. It helps to explain where do we come from and why our focus lies where it does. Estonia does not stand alone. We are a member of the European Union. The European Union has a successful practical cooperation with the many working groups of the Arctic Council, highlighting the international dimension. But what's more, the European Union has made the transition towards a sustainable society its core objective. There is the famous Green Deal, with its American role model, which has made the European Union a frontrunner in the international climate action. But we also walk the talk with our legislative framework. It's not an easy walk, by no means. Also for Estonia, which for many decades has relied in the energy production on a heavily polluting local fossil fuel, oil shale. Now the government has promised to phase out from it. We are looking into renewable alternatives, placing our hopes on the offshore wind parks, piloting cross-border cooperation for linking our grids in the Baltic Sea. What I want to highlight here, Estonia is a living example of a country in transition. In many fields, the change has already been set in stone, like the democratic reforms. In some fields, we are speaking of the mindset, like our focus on digitalization or our solid approach to data and its handling. In other fields, like the green transition, we have a long way to go, as most countries, but we are committed as we are aspired and supported by the European Union. Our research teams are strongly linked with other centers in Europe and elsewhere. A country with this background has a steady approach and a long-term interest in the economic and social development of the Arctic societies, and we believe we have something to contribute. In Europe, this is called Team Europe approach. We all benefit from the institutional strength of the European Union, but the institutions are nothing without the member states and their unique sets of skills, background, and interests. The European Union Green Deal also has its global dimension. Many of our economic and environmental policies have no chance of success if they don't resonate globally. The European Union, happily now together with the United States, is pursuing active climate diplomacy to support global ambitions. Estonian focus on the Arctic is our climate diplomacy. So this has been my pitch for Estonia as such, and now we can turn to take a closer look at our added value.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those remarks. Again, questions coming in, but we'll save those in a moment for another moment. It's now a pleasure, speaking of focusing on the research aspects and capacity and expertise of Estonia, to Dr. Sommere, who's the president of the Estonian Academy of Science. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for investing your time into today's webinar. Estonia may seem small, but it is a strong player in climate change. In the sense that, for example, the temperature in Estonia has increased almost as rapidly as in Arctic, well above 2 degrees since the 1960s. In a way, we are a country on the crossroads of climate change. What we see, one of the core things, is a major changes in air flow direction, which means changes in where the air is coming from. And this involves later changes in temperature, ice cover, which drives massive reaction of the sea surface, which is followed by the reaction of shores and ecosystem and things on which we make our living. The reason of those changes is changes to the so-called North Atlantic storm track. This is a domain of frequent presence of low-pressure systems, and this domain has extended to the Barents Sea around 1990. So the picture, what you see now, the family picture of cyclones, it's not stationary. It changes in time. And you can see that around 1990, it started to extend to the Barents Sea immediately after the Iron Curtain was disappearing. And this is a massive channel of heat to the Barents Sea, and is one part of the changes which are in the Barents Sea and which are called Atlantification. While the consequences become evident in the Arctic Ocean, we are on the way of this flux, and we can infer changes from the reaction of the Baltic Sea. While the minister told something like we are close enough to feel the direct consequences of the change in the region, then in fact I would add that we could be the indicator of changes that will happen next. So what do? We use the Baltic Sea as a test basin for understanding of the consequences of changes, understanding the impact of rapidly increasing hydrodynamic loads and loss of ice on sedimentary shores, on coastal ecosystem, on fish stocks. So the Baltic Sea is a sort of local integrator of changes to the atmospheric forcing. How we do see those changes? So changes to the ice cover duration and subsequent reaction of the sea surface to the changing wind direction, strong winds, lead to the situation which shows clearly that Estonia is the focal point of climate changes. Maximum water levels in each year increase in our area up to 1 centimeter per year. So this probably will happen to some of the Arctic shores in short time. What we do also, we try to understand and identify regime shifts in various parameters of ecosystems. And we think we know now where to look. For example, we have very strong competence in understanding of how bogs and peat from former bogs reacts to climate change. Emission of CO2 from former bogs is a counterpart of emission of methane from melting of permafrost. And we also do some methane analysis in Svalbard or Spitsbergen, whatever you like. A lot of technology advances are based on our competence in IT matters. And one of the forerunners in this area are realized in the form of autonomous underwater devices. They're used for researching marine life cycles, conducting hydrographic and geological surveys in shallow and deep waters, and up to identifying melting water channels under glaciers and determining their effect on glacier movement. The entire philosophy is actually pretty simple. Even though we know a lot about things, what have happened, there are still areas which are either concealed or severely undersampled. So gathering new knowledge about well-sampled areas doesn't actually add new scientific knowledge. We have to look into those areas where we don't have enough data in order to understand what has happened and what is about to happen. And on top of this sort of general picture, we have a whole bunch of specific research in particular areas, which I would leave to the question and answer section today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Summary. We appreciate that very much. Again, I have a number of questions, but we will follow up as we go through the program. Mentioned a number of areas, both ambassadors mentioned a number of areas of focus and expertise of Estonian researchers and scientists. One in particular was mentioned, which was ethnographic issues. And so I would ask now Dr. Aimer Wintisel, the Associate Professor in Ethnology at the University of Tartu, to share remarks, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. And yes, I was asked to introduce Estonian social and humanitarian sciences. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about social and humanitarian sciences for the reason that in Estonia, somehow it happened that anthropology belongs to humanitarian sciences, whereas in the States it's part of social sciences. But yes, Estonian social and humanitarian sciences have long and, to be honest, impressive history studying Arctic peoples. The particularity of Estonian scholarship is that we have, due to historic reasons, focused on Siberia and Finno-Ugric peoples. The Center for Estonian Siberian Studies is Tartu, where I'm from, where the University of Tartu, Estonian National Museum and Estonian Literary Museum have been main institutions to be engaged with Siberian studies. It is said that today the University of Tartu has the highest concentration of Siberian researchers outside of Russian academic institutions, so outside of Russia, let's say so. And yes, in Estonia, Siberia has been studied by social, cultural anthropologists, linguists, physical anthropologists, and folklorists. Today, Estonian scholars continue their research in Siberia, and this research is very well recognized internationally, especially in the Arctic anthropology. When in the Soviet era, Estonian scholars studied what was called in those days the traditional culture, then these days we have modernized our research agenda, and we study also modern economic, political, and ethnic processes. We have built up our own networks of cooperation and cooperational relationship with the Russian academic institutions and the Russian indigenous organizations. And I believe that one of our advantages is the fluency in Russian language and that we know how things work in Russia. Estonian Siberianists have participated also in international academic projects, including cooperation with US scholars. And a part of academic institutions, we also do have some non-academic organizations that closely work together with Russian associations representing indigenous Finno-Ugric people. And altogether, we have a relatively good idea what is the lifestyle and problems of people in the Arctic, and not only indigenous people, but all people living in there. And why does it matter? I believe that Estonia, with its digital technology experience, with polar architecture and electronic governmentality, is able to contribute to the improvement of living conditions of people in Arctic regions. But for that purpose, the industries and entrepreneurs need gatekeepers. And this is where we can step in. There are many fields where Estonia can make a lasting impact. For example, due long distances and remoteness of settlements, not only means of communication, but also access to banking, education, medical data, business environment, and so forth, can be improved when online services will be used, and we call it e-government. One very specific field in the Arctic studies is research on indigenous peoples of the Arctic, and Estonia has a very long history of that. And the issue of indigenous cultures is central to research and development of the Arctic regions. Estonian scholars, or Estonia has very good scholarship, not only regarding the traditional culture of the Arctic indigenous people, especially Siberian ones, but also the land right issues, cultural and religious transformation, changes in the lifestyle, linguistic issues, and many more. And last but not least, it might look surprising, but studying these topics, one is also confronted with the climate issues. Yes, when we study hunters and reindeer herders, we also indirectly collect data on changes in climate, flora, and fauna. And to end my talk, I say that Estonia has a solid number of scholars who have physically been in the Arctic and know firsthand what is going on in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wenzel. I appreciate those comments very much. Now, welcome to the discussion David Kennedy, who, as I mentioned, is the Senior Fellow at the Polar Institute, but currently is the Chairman of the United States Arctic Research Commission, to share a little bit about the Commission and perhaps some thoughts on international cooperation. David, please.
Thank you, Mike, for putting this together. I've heard many issues certainly overlap with the Commission and the Arctic community in the United States, and so I think this is a timely get-together. I'm hoping we have some slides and we might put this one up. This is just a reminder of the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with on the trillion-dollar Arctic issues at least, but beyond obviously the climate change, there are so many other mitigating issues, and as I've already heard, Estonia mentioned some of these as well. So next slide, please. So what is the U.S. Arctic Research Commission? It's a small government organization, very small, but it has a large mission, especially as it deals with Arctic. And you can see, I don't need to read all of the aspects of what we do, but we actually take the activities that you see here and interact with the Arctic community, both nationally and internationally, to try and get answers to these issues. We do report to in Congress, so we feel like we have some significant influence, but the answers and or the information that we provide doesn't come without an absolutely cooperative effort from everybody nationally and internationally. So next, please. So see the commissioners, they are all presidentially appointed from the last administration and this. I'm obviously the chair, but we have the commission broken down into research. You see the three on the left, then industry and indigenous. And we also have the National Science Mission represented and a small staff to go with that, a staff here in Washington, D.C., as well as staff in Alaska. A small but very powerful group, well integrated into all of the other Arctic community. Next, please. So every 2 years, put out a goals and objectives report. This is the kind of the culmination of all of the efforts that we put into not only working with others, but specific workshops that we hold and interactions with, again, the national and international community. You see improved community health and well-being. I've heard that mentioned from Estonia as well. We presence in looking at these issues, sanitation and well. Another of the things that we've really been working on recently, we've had a couple of discussions in the last couple of weeks, is working with indigenous local knowledge and been issues for some time. We're trying to get some headway and movement to come up with some better protocols and policies on how we can make all that happen. Obviously, natural resources are emerging and evolving, and the first one there, infrastructure, is another emerging issue. Other thing that I would point out is all these things I think also point to an issue that's become more and more important in the United States, but I think internationally, and that's security. We've had a number of workshops with the Department of Defense, and it's interesting to hear them talk about strategies for the Arctic, but understanding the need to have all of the environmental issues researched and answered for them so that they know what defense strategy should be. Next, please. So the last thing here, there is a daily update newsletter that comes out from the Commission. It's an attempt to gather as much information from everywhere that we can find it. And it's amazing that there is as depth and breadth of information on a daily basis as there is, but there is. And so here's the website. And I think if you have not taken a look, you should. This really does try and capture as much of what's going on in the Arctic nationally. And so very useful to take a look at. And with that, I'll stop. I'm looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for those comments. And finally, I invite into the discussion Ambassador David Bolton. He's also a senior fellow at Polar Institute, and as I noted before, spent a career at the U.S. State Department. He served as the former chair of the senior Arctic officials during the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council. Dave, please.
Thanks very much, Mike, and hello to all of you. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. So I'll start by offering a thought. The Arctic region does not belong exclusively to those states that have territory in the Arctic. This is true both in a legal sense, in that there is a large area of the Arctic that is beyond national jurisdiction. But more importantly, the issues confronting the Arctic today are of concern, legitimate concern, to many countries in the world, arguably to all countries in the world. Foreign Minister Limetz and the other speakers, particularly from Estonia, all highlighted climate change. And yes, this is an obvious issue, perhaps the key issue confronting the Arctic today and driving a lot of the other issues that are unfolding in the Arctic. Foreign Minister Limetz spoke of coalitions of the willing. And yes, we need coalitions of the willing to address climate problems, including in the Arctic itself. But there are other things happening in the Arctic too that are of legitimate concern to other nations. As the Arctic becomes more accessible, there is more shipping, potentially tourism, oil and gas development. Yes, still in the Arctic is possible to expand mining interests, potential fisheries. So there is a lot happening in the region, and there needs to be a focus of this, not just among the Arctic countries themselves, but others that have expertise to contribute, that have a sincere interest in the region. Science related to climate and to all other things in the Arctic, of course, is another obvious way in which non-Arctic states, including Estonia, can and have contributed greatly to the processes of the Arctic. It's still a poorly understood part of the world in many respects. The science is helping us gain a better foothold on issues in the Arctic, but there is a lot more to do, obviously, and countries like Estonia can and should contribute to scientific endeavors relating to the Arctic region. I'm well aware that Estonia has applied for observer status at the Arctic Council. Over the last decade or so, quite a few non-Arctic states have attained observer status. And indeed, when the US was last chairing the Arctic Council from the period 2015 to 2017, we introduced a number of innovations into the practice of the Council designed to give the observers, not just the observer states, but the observer organizations as well, a greater voice in what was going on. We would devote portions of the meetings of the senior Arctic officials at least once a year to bring the observers to the table and hear from them. And as chair of the senior Arctic officials, they also met separately with the observers each time the senior Arctic officials met. And I believe these practices have continued in the ensuing chairmanships of Finland and now Iceland, and I hope they continue as well when Russia takes up the chair of the Arctic Council next month. And the last thing I will say is the Arctic region has built a kind of governance architecture over the last 25 years. The Arctic Council is a key part of it, but there are other aspects to it as well. There are now an array of international agreements relating to the Arctic, and there are other efforts underway to strengthen the governance regime in the Arctic. I think we will need a stronger governance regime in the future as human activity continues to expand in the Arctic. The current arrangements may not be adequate, and it's quite possible that some non-Arctic states will have a say or a role in thinking through what a stronger international governance regime for the Arctic might look like in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave, for your comments. Let me begin now with some questions that have been spurred by many of your comments. To begin with, let's start with Ambassador Walmer, please. Your comments spurred the following, well, spurred many questions. But can you speak a little bit more to the importance of multilateral relationships? Yes, the Arctic Council, but how the Arctic Council and that multilateral relationship reinforces or highlights Estonia's participation in other multilateral organizations?
Well, thank you. It's a very good question, and to begin with, all those issues that we're dealing with in Arctic, the climate change, all these profound changes, they're so big that none of the countries is able to deal with it alone. So it is a collective effort, both between the governments, between the scientists. So it's sort of in essence, it already sort of requires cooperation in different levels. And for Estonia, of course, the work in multilateral fora is one of our key strengths, where we work starting from United Nations, where we are now non-permanent member in the Security Council, to European Union, which is one of the main sort of everyday working for us, and places where the scientists cooperate, where the financing can be achieved. To hopefully in the future then to Arctic Council, and we are very much ready to be a share and give our small part in those efforts in those big organizations.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we'll just stay with you, Ambassador, if you don't mind, for one more moment, and that is, you noted a number of examples of the digital world, right? E-health, e-education. Can you speak a little bit about Estonia's capacity, emphasis on the digital world? And of course, the pandemic has shown us that we rely more on our e-world every single day.
Yeah, I like very much you brought in this pandemic, because that actually shows that when we are locked in our home offices, there has to be ways to keep the life going. And that there are simple things, you can still send emails, but to keep the courts working on a distance, the schools, all the infrastructure of a country, that is something that we have achieved here in Estonia in quite a short time. And somehow this is something that that the people are requiring from the government, and they are kind of expecting that the services that the government offers to the people are fast, invisible, efficient. So that, I mean, that the best government service is the one that you don't notice. You know, it happens just because the government knows that something happened and it's done. And it has been built up in about last 15 years. So the experience of sort of enabling societies to work so that you don't really have to be present in a person is very fresh, and we know how to do it. And in many places in the Arctic region, the distances are huge, and people can't really come and go to some offices or to queue up or to send applications. So the digital ways of doing things could be a very big improvement in quite vast areas. And we have done it. We know how it works. We like it. And then we try to expand it.
Thank you very much. Well, we might have time to come back to some of those topics in a little bit. Let me move to Ambassador Duell. You noted that Estonia is very much focused on this transition in terms of energy, all forms of energy, in particular renewables. Can you give an example or two of technologies or research applications that are currently deployed by Estonia, or at least being researched by Estonia, that could or may have application to the Arctic region? As we know, the Arctic region is a very large neighborhood, mostly dependent on oil and gas. And we'd like to learn a little bit more about what Estonia is thinking, perhaps in the Baltics, that might be applied, or elsewhere, that might be applied to the broader Arctic region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraga, for this question. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, and I cannot actually tell you what exactly can be transferred from the Estonian experience in green transition, in our energy transition. But I can give you some examples. What are the challenges in Estonia, what we have already done? So I mentioned that we were also very much dependent on fossil fuels, and we are now switching to renewables. And we are looking into wind power in general and offshore wind power in particular. I can imagine that something like this is important also for the Arctic communities. But I think even more importantly, we don't need to talk about those really industrial solutions at the moment. There are many other countries in the world who are dealing with this. And while we are dreaming of, first of all, harnessing the wind power into hydrogen, and this is a research ongoing all around the world, and we are not pioneers here. But where we do have our contribution is smart energy consumption. So it's not only about the source of energy, it's also about consumption and reducing the consumption. To do this, you need, first of all, smart metering. And smart metering is a strength of Estonia. We have 100% gone over to this in our electricity consumption. And our startups are offering some quite innovative solutions as to resolve this high demand issue where you have the peak hours and you need to provide a lot of energy, but it can actually be distributed much more evenly. So that is just a few words about Estonian solutions. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and appreciate the emphasis on the conservation component, the policies behind conservation, metering, monitoring, and how that then feeds into perhaps a more comprehensive energy equation for all nations, but certainly application in the North. Dr. Somare, may I ask you a question now? And this has to do with research capacity in Estonia. Can you share with us a little bit more comprehensive look at Estonia's research facilities or test beds or capacities, physical capacities that could be applied to the Arctic region? We hear a lot about field stations, icebreaker capacity in support of research. We hear a lot about university settings and their ability for field research. How could Estonia enhance and cooperate with other nations that have physical components of their research entities in a way that perhaps would enhance what we have now or bring something new to those who are cooperating in Arctic research?
Thank you very much for this question. If you are small, you have to be smart. If you are small, you don't have much concrete, but you may have a lot of brain and good ideas. So what we are happy to supply is our mental capacities. And just picking up perhaps a couple of things where Estonian scientists and developers are well ahead of the rest of the world. What already Ambassador Dial was asked and what she mentioned, we are really good in building of energy-saving, low-energy consumption houses. And not only insulation, but with excellent indoor climate. And also we do that today in the northern part of the temperate zone and up to Arctic, but it's very easy to reshape those for Arctic conditions. What we also do, for example, is trying to understand how the ecosystem actually functions. So our scientists have offered a sort of new understanding of categorization of species based on DNA. So you can categorize very easily polar bear from brown bear. But if you have fungi or lichens, you can't do so. So we can do it now. And we have involved into this research a lot of research groups all over the world. And our fungi experts, specifically Professor Leho Tedersoo, has reached, together with other colleagues, some very brilliant things. For example, that the ecosystem of fungi in Arctic is exactly as rich as the ecosystem of fungi in tropical rainforests. And changes to this ecosystem are actually one of the best indicators of what has happened or what may happen.
Thank you very much for that. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I'm going to hold those until we have one more round of questions. Let me ask Professor Wenzel. You noted particular research related to Siberia and indigenous peoples and the impact of climate change on hunting and subsistence patterns. The question I have for you is, how can that capacity, that expertise, be brought to perhaps some of the working groups within the Arctic Council structure, in particular, those that are focused on this nexus between climate change and the impact on indigenous people, perhaps in this perspective, on the Siberian cultures currently dealing with their landscape literally changing under their feet?
Thank you. So, as much as I recall when we did those plans, so in which working groups at the Arctic Council Estonia could contribute, then there were at least 3 groups where Estonia could bring in their knowledge on indigenous people. And the thing is that when we look at indigenous people, then this is not only a topic you study as a cultural issue or you study something as a linguistic issue. And there are certain stereotypes that indigenous people, this is very much about, they're preserving their languages and so on. But basically, indigenous people, it's also a legal problem, so the status of indigenous people. And this is something you have to really study it, so how it reflects in their position of society, but also in their livelihood. And in this sense, for instance, Russian indigenous and your own indigenous people of Alaska have totally different status, but this means also that their access to different resources and the state's obligations to them is very different. And also Indigenous cultures itself, they're very much based on a livelihood, which is, yeah, as you said, hunting and subsistence economy, and in Russia also reindeer herding. And this is, again, this is a legal issue. So the ways how the state regulates land use. And there is a whole scholarship, what is called legal anthropology, that studies or different sides of that sort of topic. So therefore, a part of this purely cultural and linguistic issues, Estonia has the expertise to contribute different groups where also the whole legal issue is very important, where the governance is very important, and yes, that would be my quite a short answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now go to David Kennedy. David, you spent a career working in and around the Arctic, in the United States, of course, but also internationally. My question for you is the role not so much of the Arctic Research Commission, but in terms of further cooperation and integration of Arctic research organizations and nations. So my question to you is, although we hear a lot about perhaps competition in the North, it seems to me that the cooperation in the North is built upon a number of issues. One issue in particular is Arctic research. So my question here then is, how do you see this evolution of Arctic research cooperation over the next 10 years or so as a building block upon which we have a very different view of the Arctic, whether that's political, but also environmental? How do we all cooperate better to get a better sense of what's happening in a time of dynamic change?
Yes, that's quite a. Well, in my presentation and several of the other people that have presented, it's clear that the complexity of the issues and the dramatic change is not something any country, let alone any institution, can handle by themselves. So somehow we have to do a better job of working collaboratively across all the nations. Obviously, we have the Arctic Council. We have an event coming up. I'm not sure whether Estonia may be involved, but the Arctic Science Ministerial, which is a way to exchange information and maybe make better partnerships. But I think we probably need to do something beyond that. I think if we're going to really do a better job of collaborating on a research, we need to use some of our international Arctic institutions, and there are several. I can't name them right off the top of my head, but we probably need to have within the next year or two some significant coming together, if you will, of all Arctic countries that are involved in research, better compare our notes and come up with a way to better share our data. It's also been mentioned we have huge data gaps. If we could collaboratively figure out a way to understand those gaps and maybe share how we would go forward with better monitoring and observation, all those things would be very important. So I almost think it takes some specific new approach to bring all the countries together to look at our research and see how we can do better.
Thank you, David. I know that was a complicated, multi-pronged question all wrapped into one, so thank you for trying to navigate that. David Bolton, my friend, we've talked a little bit about the evolution of the observer nations within the Arctic Council context, and the more inclusive approach to the Arctic. When we speak about the Arctic, we're talking a lot about an ocean, even though surrounded by land. I wonder if I could put you on the spot to provide for us one or two issues that you think, in particular, the international community should perhaps focus on in the coming few years related to the Arctic Ocean. And here I'm thinking also the comments by our colleagues from Estonia about their capacity and the analog of the Baltic Sea, the Baltic region. So I guess in short, I'm asking you, one or two issues that the international community should focus on that actually can make a meaningful change to understand better the Arctic Ocean?
Thanks very much, Mike. Well, so let's start with a proposition: the Arctic Ocean is not well understood, and that as it becomes more accessible, we will need to understand it better. As we sit here today, there is no international marine science organization focused exclusively on the Arctic. There is an international marine science organization for the North Atlantic, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, and it has an analog for the North Pacific, the North Pacific Marine Science Organization, generally known as PICES. For the Central Arctic Ocean, it may be possible, and indeed it may become truly beneficial, to create a similar organization for the Central Arctic Ocean dedicated to trying to improve human understanding of that body of water. And there are ideas kicking around as we speak to try to do that. It's not clear yet the time is ripe for it, but I suspect within the next decade there will be some momentum for such an institution to sort of become a new umbrella for Arctic marine science. And beyond that, as human activities in the Arctic Ocean continue to increase, there may be a need to manage those activities in a more robust and coordinated way than is currently taking place. In the Baltic Sea, we have the Helsinki Commission, HELCOM, which does that for shipping and related pollution issues. There is no comparable body for the Central Arctic Ocean, and it's possible in time that we may need something like that too. So that's something for even non-Arctic states such as Estonia to consider as it looks ahead to future governance of the Arctic region. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot there, and a very good set of answers to very different but integrated questions. We have just about 3 minutes left to this program. So let's take this time. I would like to invite each of our speakers to just give us 30 seconds or so of their reflections on this particular program or any other comments you would like to make as concluding remarks. And let's begin with Ambassador Walmer. Ambassador.
I'd say we should try to combine the new technologies that we have now on solar energy, wind energy, and accumulation capacities that connect people all over the Arctic to the internet and then to the world, and upgrade all the scientific work and then the life of indigenous people through those new possibilities, and something where we could actually be very instrumental.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Duell, please.
Well, I have not really any ready-made conclusion at hand, but I would say that what I have learned today is that Arctic is fascinating. It's really a plethora of very important scientific processes going on in the Arctic, and obviously we want to be part of it. We are a curious people, and we want to contribute from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. President Sommeré, please.
It has already become a cliché that competitiveness of a country is a direct function of the ability of this country to extract knowledge from its best scientists. I think the future of Arctic will be similarly this kind of function.
Thank you very much. Professor Wenzel, please.
Yes, thank you. When we speak about Arctic, especially policymakers, they speak very often about the Northern Sea route and climate change and all those topics, but I think the Arctic has one big problem, which are humans who are living in there. And what I mean is that to keep human life in the Arctic is very expensive and very complicated. And this is the case especially in Russia, which has the highest density of human population in the Arctic countries in general. And what I do believe is also that people who live in the Arctic, independent are they indigenous or incoming, they also have the right for the whole, for the same security and comfort what we do have in more southern areas. And I think this will be a huge also political and economic challenge in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just note to the audience, we're probably going to go about 1 minute over here. Chairman Kennedy, your final comments.
It's been a very interesting session. We enjoyed hearing Estonia's perspective. Where I need to go back and do some pursuing, in particular, alternative energy. We're doing a lot of work on alternative here. Listening to what Estonia is doing, we really should share some notes. And I think there are 2 or 3 other topics. So very well, and I appreciate being able to participate.
Well, good. Perhaps we've provided for some follow-up discussions. Ambassador Bolton, your comments, please.
2 thoughts. 1, there is a lot to do in the Arctic and about the Arctic. And 2, good ideas can come from anywhere. And so with that in mind, I'm very encouraged to hear the enthusiasm from our friends in Estonia for working together on Arctic issues.
Thank you. Let me thank all of you for this discussion and for our colleagues in Estonia and the government's interest and willingness to speak with us about their aspirations for the Arctic and what their partnership currently brings to issues related to the Arctic, as we've heard today, but also how their country's participation in the Arctic Council as an observer nation might even be not only enhanced for Estonia, but provide to the Arctic community what David just noted, which is more ideas, more capacity, and more understanding of the Arctic. So I want to thank you all for watching today. I want to thank my colleagues from Estonia and the United States. And I hope very well that we can have a follow-up discussion to see not only what happens in May with this observer application, but also to further tease out the issues and themes we've discussed today with our colleagues from Estonia. And thank you very much for spending part of your morning, part of your afternoon, or your part of your evening with the Polar Institute and our colleagues from Estonia. Have a very good rest of the day. Thank you.